Hello friends and welcome back to another review from Through the Eyes of Enji, where we're trying to work our way through 101 films in 365 days to raise money for We Are With You and the Shropshire Village Players. Now today, courtesy of Grace, we are looking at Green Lantern. Released in 2011, directed by Martin Campbell, written by Greg Berlanti, Michael Green, Mark Guggenheim and Michael Goldenberg, based on a story by Greg Berlanti, Michael Green and Michael Goldenberg. Starring Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan, Blake Lively as Carol Ferris, Peter Sarsgaard as Hector Hammond, Mark Strong as Sinestro and Tim Robbins as Hammond. Reckless test pilot Hal Jordan is granted an alien ring that bestows him with otherworldly powers that inducts him into an intergalactic police force, the Green Lantern Corps. Just to let you know that I watched the extended version of the film. I've only ever seen this film once before, back when it was released in cinemas. And this experience was hard work. I've tried watching Green Lantern 3 times over this weekend, and the first 2 times I managed about 10 to 15 minutes of the film. When I watched the opening, I started having little flashbacks to later events in the film that I vaguely remembered, and it just made me want to flat out stop watching and do anything else. Especially early on when I realised just how much of the film was going to rip off Top Gun, which is a film that I've never been a fan of anyway, and I'm eternally grateful that none of my friends asked me to review it. You know who you are. Rather than allowing Green Lantern to be a sprawling space opera like it was advertised back in 2010, 2011, I realised that I was probably going to be watching something more akin to a romantic comedy instead. And Green Lantern, I found, was a good example of wasted potential. Because Green Lantern's got great history. The character's been around since 1940 when our titular Green Lantern was Alan Scott. And then he was reinvented in 1959 with Hal Jordan. It's fair to say that the character's had something of a rocky road over the years, and this film coming out was not the first time that fanboys have pissed and moaned about Green Lantern. Because see, in the 1990s, there was the event series of the Death of Superman and the Rise of the Supermen. For more information about comics in the 90s and Speculator Boom and all that, you're probably better watching the Spawn episode. So during the series, Coast City, which is Hal Jordan's hometown, was destroyed by Brainiac and the cyborg Superman, don't ask. And Hal didn't take this very well. When he approached the Guardians, who are the bosses of the Green Lantern Corps, who are, for all intents and purposes, space police, they didn't immediately fix what had happened for Hal. So Hal Jordan had a bit of a tantrum, and this all-American hero killed and or depowered all of the other Green Lanterns, appearing to go insane, and became a supervillain called Parallax. Fanboys did not like this change, especially when the last Green Lantern ring was given to Kyle Rayner, and there was the usual cries of how this was an attack on masculinity, or DC Comics being anti-military, and the usual shite that comes out when stuff like this changes. But what was impressive was this movement had the name Heat, which stood for Hal's Emerald Attack Team, although they did change it to Hal's Emerald Action Team. And this was prior to the internet coming into its own, so a lot of its communication was done by phone and by letter. And this campaign lasted for a decade, calling for DC to make Hal Jordan the main Green Lantern for Sector of Earth again, and to absolve him of the crimes he committed as Parallax. And this was putting out adverts in newspapers and protesting outside the DC offices. And DC Comics made some token attempts to try and pacify them, which included Hal Jordan's soul becoming linked with the Spectre. But it wasn't until 2004 when a storyline was conceived for Hal to return being the Green Lantern, and this was a storyline that also had the weakness of the Green Lanterns, which was the colour yellow. Yes, really, to carry some more weight. And so what they came up with was the colour yellow is the physical embodiment of fear, whereas Green Lanterns represents the embodiment of willpower, which is where they get their powers from. And each colour on the spectrum had a creature which was kind of the physical manifestation. And for the colour of yellow, the representation was this violent space bug called Parallax. So yeah, Hal didn't do anything wrong. He was just possessed by Parallax. The comic series went batshit crazy after that, frankly. I'm not going to spoil it. You should go and read it. It's really good. But I just wanted to put an example down of how deep the lore is for the Green Lantern Corps, and how there's huge amounts to draw on. They could have done so for the film, and a lot they could have done with the property, but didn't. See, in 2004, when this film was in pre-production, Green Lantern was envisioned as an action comedy starring Jack Black, of all people. However, this version was scrapped after a piss-poor reception from, what else, the internet. But somehow, I don't feel like they ever totally removed the concept, looking at the film I've now watched. Now, Ryan Reynolds is a fantastic comedian, and he's also done some really good serious work. Buried, by the way, is still my favourite. But he looks really lost here, especially in the far, far too short section of the film, which actually takes place in space, where everything apart from his head is CGI. Time, by the way, has not been kind to this film. Watching it on a large 4K TV, the effects look a lot worse than they did back in 2011, which is a problem for a film that focuses so much on the special effects, but we'll come back to that. Ryan Reynolds plays the film like a comedy, and it doesn't sit well with the serious themes they're trying to discuss in the film, nor with the performances of the other actors, apart from Peter Sarsgaard, who plays his role like a pantomime villain with cackles galore. Okay, so the thing that everyone always brings up about Green Lantern is the special effects, and they are fucking dreadful. Somebody somewhere decided to make the suit and mask CGI rather than give Ryan Reynolds an actual costume, and it looks dreadful. And it did at the time, and it still does now. And when you've got a character who can literally make anything he can imagine into reality, you have a blank book to create some really impressive spectacles with action sequences. However, the first real action sequence we have on Earth is with a helicopter crashing, and Green Lantern saves it by creating a race car and a racetrack. Now, it sounds incredibly cheesy. Sorry, I left the window open again so that you can hear the train go past. It sounds incredibly cheesy just saying that out loud, and it looks awful on the screen. And it's just as distracting seeing Reynolds' head bobbing around in the training session, attached in a completely CG environment. It's really distracting, but, at least it's not the romantic plot that you've got going on back on Earth, which is even worse. We've got two villains in the piece. We've got Hector Hammond, again, Peter Sarsgaard, obviously having a whale of a time, but he's not presented actually as any real threat to Green Lantern. And so the action sequences involving the two of them just don't feel like they have much in the way of a threat. And then there's also Parallax, who here is imagined in the same school as the Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, where we make the world-ending monster our heroes have to tackle a big cloud. He's painted like this world-ending event, but again, there's no real threat because he seems to be coming for Earth because he didn't like the Green Lantern who had the ring before Hal. And we don't really have much motivation other than that. It's also been really obviously choreographed how he's actually going to beat him, which doesn't help. And you know what? I think my biggest problem with Green Lantern is that it's just really boring. Sure, it's really frustrating that we've got a film which lacks any kind of ambition or scope, but I've seen films that I've really enjoyed who haven't had an ambition to make this big, great film. But the Green Lantern's just really dull watching it, and I don't find myself getting excited when Hal suits up to look for trouble, as the man himself says. Nor do I feel any kind of impending threat when the villains rock up to do their thing. I wonder, and if I'm right, I really like this film even less, whether they're trying to do some kind of comparison between Hector and Hal, where one of them has the he's been divinely chosen to get additional powers. And so when Hal is given the power, he becomes noble, whereas Hector, who hasn't been divinely chosen, gets power, then he will inevitably become evil and start killing people, including, I shit you not, including Amanda Waller, who you may recall from Suicide Squad, and who's a major player in the DC universe. And she's set up here and has a whole backstory, and then she's just bumped off with no ceremony in a shitty action sequence. This film was supposed to set up the DC universe in on the big screen, and with all the history and lore of the Green Lantern Corps, this was the story they chose to tell. We spend more time on whether Hal will get together with his fellow co-pilot than Hal Jordan, a member of the Green Lantern Corps, learning to use his powers to defend the galaxy. What the shit? And the music. Okay, I don't even talk about the music normally, but music in Green Lantern sums the film up for me because it's boring, cookie cutter, stereotypical superhero film music. The theme of the film seems to be great power, great responsibility, like we're just ripping off Spider-Man again. The direction and the choreography feels like someone who's doing it in their sleep. The script is boring and lifeless, especially in the seemingly endless exposition, which, when in space, isn't really helped because the special effects behind it look like shite. The voice acting is occasionally on point. Mark Strong is never bad, regardless of what he's in. And really, that's the only faint praise I can actually find for Green Lantern. I realised this afternoon when I locked myself in the living room to go through the film because I knew the deadline was coming up, that I was watching this potentially big, sprawling space epic, and I just wasn't having any fun. I like watching superhero films because more often than not, they're just good fun, and I have a big goofy grin on my face, and especially when they get intergalactic, because I love me some intergalactic. But Green Lantern, I wonder if they just didn't know what kind of film they wanted to make. And, that'll happen when you start shooting a film without a script. And it's not the worst superhero film ever made. You've got probably a week and a half or so to wait before you get that. But unlike with Batman and Robin, which I actually enjoyed breaking down and examining again, watching Green Lantern and then having to assemble some thoughts on this dead horse was a real chore. And I know I've got a roast in the oven and I've got hoovering to do, and that I'd rather be doing that than talking about Green Lantern. And the film's reputation speaks for itself. Everyone who's seen Green Lantern has told someone that Green Lantern isn't very good, and you don't need to see me pissing away on the broken decade-old corpse of this film to tell you that. I can't even suggest watching the film as some kind of relic to see how bad it can get with superhero films, like I can with the likes of Batman vs Superman. You can just YouTube the shitty CGI costume and save yourself 2 hours of painful boredom that I sat through. It's terrible. And I think the more time I thought about it, the more I disliked giving it the time and actually spending money having to watch it. And I watch films because it's escapism. And so, my mood on what I want to watch changes on a dime. Sometimes I want to watch something more serious that gets my brain ticking over. Sometimes I want to watch something that makes me laugh. Sometimes I just want, and the same reason I play video games, sometimes I just want the escapism of a powerful hero taking on evil. And Green Lantern could have done that to an astounding degree if we just get Hal Jordan off. For God's sake, recast Ryan Reynolds, get him off Earth, teach him the powers, and have him go off to combat some intergalactic threat. Keep Parallax in it if you want. This film is obviously set up for a sequel because Sinestro gets a yellow ring at the end, and Sinestro was a big villain in the Green Lantern stories. It's obviously setting it up to have him as the villain in a sequel that never came, because this film made 219 million total at the box office, and the film itself cost 209 million to make, and then another 100 million was spent on top of that on advertising. So the sequel was never going to come. And even now, the reputation of this film speaks volumes, that when we were getting films for Aquaman and Shazam, we're getting these big films. Green Lantern, the only mention or sight of Green Lantern we've seen so far is in Justice League in a battle scene. That's the Joss Whedon cut. I haven't seen the Snyder cut yet. That's my Easter treat. I'm putting away an afternoon so I can sit down and watch all 4 hours of the Snyder cut, and I'm very excited. But Green Lantern could have been a great film if they had knocked away more of the comedy and the romantic side, and maybe tried not ripping off so many other films. Great power means great responsibility from Spider-Man, talking to a love interest on a rooftop after a flight from Superman. It ground me down, and by the end of it, I was just tired and bored. And the worst thing was I knew I had to write about it and talk about it, which I've done so now for over a quarter of an hour. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the video so you get an update when I do another one. Like it, share it around. Next time we are doing Underworld, because I knew with these 5 films I've got on the slate at the moment, I wanted to have a bad film at the beginning of Green Lantern. I'm going to finish them up with Fantastic, which is probably going to be a long video because I hate Fantastic. And then, so we'll do Underworld next. Hopefully that will be out on Wednesday if I have time to watch it. We'll follow that up with The Two Popes, which I know nothing about. Excalibur will be after that because I love Excalibur. And then finally we will get to Fantastic. So thank you very much indeed for watching. Thank you again for all your generous donations, and I will see you again soon.